chick flicks, romantic comedies, rom-coms. You love them, you hate them, and I'm here to eviscerate them. This is the RomCom Killjoys podcast. I'm your host, Jonelle Walker. I'm a writer and researcher who studies gender theory, ideology, and representations of both in popular culture. I've gathered together my favorite pop culture literate friends to take your favorite rom-com way too seriously in order to understand why we love to hate these movies and what they're trying to tell us about love, relationships, and marriage. Now, let's get on with some feminist joy killing. Welcome, everybody. This week on the show, we have the illustrious Chelsea Lynn. Chelsea, could you introduce yourself?
Jonelle and I are old friends, and I recently completed a master's degree in women, peace, and security, so I did gender as a whole career thing. So I'm really excited to get into this film because it is a mess.
Yeah, I have to say that watching this particular film, it gave me pause, and I was thinking to myself, why did I start doing this project? I really, really do not enjoy rom-coms, but that's just going to make this conversation even better.
I really had fond memories for this film because I was a huge Grey's Anatomy fan back in the day, and I think this was actually before Kevin McKidd came on the show, but it was like, I remember this so fondly because of Patrick Dempsey and Kevin McKidd, but rewatching it was just woof. It was not great.
Let's do it. All right, so the film in question is Maid of Honor, and that's maid spelled M-A-D-E, which is an assertion that we can debate over the course of this episode. It was made in the year of our Lord, 2008. And let's see, here I'm going to read a quick synopsis of it. Ahem. Always shy of commitment, Tom, played by Patrick Dempsey, lives as a serial dater. Hannah, Michelle Moynihan, his best friend, has wanted to marry, and now has found Mr. Right, just as Tom realizes he really loves Hannah. When she asks him to be in her bridal party, Tom seizes the opportunity to prevent the nuptials and woo her himself. Well, ostensibly this is what the film is about, but Chelsea, what is this movie really about?
Well, first off, would we call Tom shy? I don't think we'd call him shy. But secondly, I think this movie is about how society must enforce rigid gender roles at all costs, at all times, and punish those who deviate, and especially men who deviate from strict adherence to masculinity. So, yeah, I just think this movie really has a lot to say about what kind of gender performativity is allowed, what kind of sexuality is allowed, who gets punished for it, and why.
Oh, Chelsea, could you explain for our listeners what you mean by gender performativity?
I'm not sure I can do this as eloquently as you could, but it's about how people are conditioned to both inhabit and demonstrate behaviors and appearance that are assigned to specific genders. So if you're performing masculinity, specifically in this film, it's all about how it's all about sexual prowess and how you can't be seen as feminine. You can't be seen as deviating away from a very specific masculinity, or else you're seen as weak or less than your peers. And I think this is repeatedly demonstrated by how often Tom is feminized and kind of like made fun of for being the maid of honor. Like the fact that he's asked, what dress size are you, Tom? Or how everybody assumes he's gay for performing this, like, a role of friendship for Hannah. So, yeah, Tom gets punished a lot in this film for deviating away from his assigned gender role, but he also inhabits it a lot in the way that he treats women. So, this movie is pretty confused, but also doesn't like people straying away from their assigned boxes.
Right, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I think one really great illustration of this is the very first scene of the movie. So let's talk through that. I wrote in my notes, the first note that I wrote down was, Monica Lewinsky and Hillary Clinton jokes that women are in on? I am in hell.
I remembered this and I hated it immediately, especially because I think a lot of work has been done, and because this movie came out in 2008, which was a big year for Hillary Clinton, and I think a lot of our reflection on that has just shown how much, like, Bill Clinton really abused his power in that relationship, and Monica Lewinsky was castigated and demonized for decades, and she really didn't deserve it. But hey, let's make fun of her again.
Right, and for those of you who haven't seen the film, it begins with a flashback to Tom and Hannah's college days, which is how they met. This is the meet cute question mark of their relationship, where Tom is kind of casually strolling through a party dressed as Bill Clinton, and he keeps running into various Monica Lewinskys. And he meets Hannah by stumbling into the bedroom, we presume, of a conquest of his that is dressed like Monica Lewinsky. And he gets into bed with Hannah, who is not participating in this party for some reason, and is in fact asleep. It is not aged well in the time of #MeToo.
I mean, at the very worst, it suggests that Tom is down with date rape, and at the very best, it suggests that he's willing to sleep with a girl who is way too drunk to consent. So, not a great look for Tom.
Not a great look for Tom, and there are actually a few lines in this scene that I think are worth noting. Hannah describes Tom as a person who has the reputation of, quote, a senior who preys on freshmen. And then after Tom and Hannah have their first sort of meet cute conversation where they declare that neither one of them is interested in having sex with the other, this is, of course, a lie, Tom says, that was incredible, almost like having sex without the crying.
Not cool, Tom, not cool.
Not great, although I do love that Hannah, in order to defend herself in this scene, after which she becomes friends with this person who essentially assaulted her, fascinating commentary, used a perfume, like a Calvin Klein perfume, as a mace, or not as a mace, but as mace, which I feel like has its own sort of layer of analysis that she's using perfume as a way to push away Tom.
I actually, you know what, I think that she uses her femininity a lot to, well, I'm not sure where I want to go with this, but I think that Hannah does use her femininity a lot in kind of in policing her boundary with Tom. And she does use that, actually. There's a scene later in the movie that I want to talk about, but she does use femininity a lot to kind of push at him and push at his boundaries. So I think that the Calvin Klein, or Eternity by Calvin Klein, is kind of a good first indicator of this.
Well, why don't we go there? Let's talk about the scene you're interested in talking about. We can start with femininity here and then move on to the masculinity, because boy, oh boy, do we have a basketball scene for you, listeners. But let's start with femininity.
So the scene I'm thinking about in particular is when Hannah is taking Tom shopping for her trousseau and drags him into the lingerie section, where Tom is obviously uncomfortable because at this point in the film he's realized that he's attracted to her and wants to be with her, not just sexually but also emotionally. And Hannah's essentially forcing him through this scene where she's playing on his attraction by modeling lingerie for him. And I just don't know, this kind of goes into a larger question for, I don't know who this movie is for. But the fact that Michelle Monaghan is kind of paraded around in this lingerie, and when she's dragging him in to model all this lingerie for him, Hannah literally says, let's put your whoring to good use. So she's making Tom uncomfortable. She's obviously playing up her femininity as a weapon, and she's slut-shaming him at the same time. So that actually goes into one of my least favorite parts of the entire film.
Which is what?
I really don't like this part of the film because I think that that it's both putting Michelle Monaghan on display for someone, and it's also using her feminine wiles to make Tom uncomfortable, and just generate the situation that I don't think anybody needs.
I think that you're making a really good point, and it's something that you and I sort of jokingly went back and forth about as we were watching this movie, but I actually think that that's true, that there's kind of two potential threads with Hannah's femininity in this film. It's either that she's sort of this unassuming, mild, cool girl who can sort of hang with Tom's rampant misogyny and rejection of all things feminine and womanly, or she's like a raging sociopath who has been playing a ridiculously long con. I just want that to be true so much, in which case there's sort of this interesting thing going on here that if we really wanted to get super academic about it, we could suggest that there's kind of two audiences for this movie, maybe. There's the people who are coming into it to see like a very standard rom-com, and then for other freaks like us, you come in for the subversive, aggressive femininity that has just run circles around this unassuming, sexually rapacious man.
I definitely agree with your assessment of Hannah as the quote-unquote cool girl. Kind of thinking back to the big speech in
Gone Girl. Yep, that's Gillian Flynn.
Yes. I think that is especially in the way that she fulfills the emotional intimacy that Tom doesn't realize as he needs. And I think that their friendship is actually propping up. I think that their friendship facilitates and perpetuates the way he treats his sexual conquests. If he didn't have this core of emotional intimacy and friendship with Hannah, then I think that he would have come to a reckoning in his life way earlier. So she's kind of allowing, by going to the flea markets and by, eating dim sum and going to the bakery every Sunday, she's fulfilling this emotional need that he doesn't recognize he has. And this allows him to treat women like crap in every other aspect of his life.
And that's all beautifully summed up, too, in how we learn very early on in the film that Hannah has been Tom's date to 6 of his father's weddings, which feels like the perfect encapsulation of her sort of providing this sort of emotional intimacy that we're presuming a wife type figure would provide. Whether or not that's true, that's kind of part of the ideology of it. And then, of course, that's also sort of part of his assumption that he would never want to get married because he has this terrible sort of male figure looming over him to prove that marriage is a scam.
My question throughout this whole film is, who hurt Tom? Like, what happened to him that he just has this completely skewed attitude and view towards women? And it's obviously his father, and that his dad has gone through 6 divorces and admits that that he screwed up when he, did something to Tom's mom. And then she died. So that's obviously trauma that needs a lot of therapy to unpack. So Tom should have just gone to therapy.
That's a great answer to that question. And I think another suitable answer to the question, who hurt Tom, is toxic masculinity. So let's pivot and talk about masculinity in this film. And specifically, I want to talk to you about a scene sort of towards the middle of the film where Tom and his gang of boys, the requisite gang of boys in a rom-com, play basketball with Hannah's extremely Scottish, like almost offensively Scottish fiance.
I would also like to point out that this is just one of many basketball scenes in a rom-com. So, yeah. Again, who's this movie for? But we can't have male bonding without sports.
There must be sports. And interestingly enough, what I found really interesting about this basketball scene is not only do the characters sort of go in thinking like, well, Colin, Hannah's fiance, is Scottish, and therefore he will not best us at our masculinity contest, i.e., basketball, because he doesn't know how to play. But then, of course, he dunks on all of them. And then to add insult to injury, supposedly, as the film puts it, they all go into the shower together, and lo and behold, what do they find?
That man has mad cow disease.
Yes, he has mad cow disease, aka
strong contender for worst line in the film.
It was pretty rough. That is for anyone confused at home, that is how they describe their shocking revelation that Colin has a very large member. Right. It's sort of fascinating that even though in a lot of American rom-coms, the European or otherwise sort of like othered character tends to be feminized, in this case, he's actually representing like everything about ideal masculinity, which is kind of curious. It almost sort of plays into, like you said, this running thing where Tom is consistently getting his masculinity undermined.
I really struggle. I love Kevin McKidd. I again, harkening back to my Grey's Anatomy fangirl days, I love Kevin McKidd. But this character is just an amalgamation of every shallow, materialistic quality that a woman could possibly want. This man is not a character. He is a laundry list of fantasies. So I think he's just perfectly engineered to threaten Tom. I think that Colin is just engineered to poke at every single insecurity that a man might have. He's wealthy, he's well hung, he's a duke, he's got a cool profession, he makes whiskey, and he's captured, he rescued Hannah on horseback. So he's just a laundry list of as I said, a laundry list of fantasies.
Yeah, all of those sort of romance novel-y characteristics that Colin has made me really think about something that the film might be putting forward as a theory, which is that, as you said, I mean, Hannah doesn't really have a relationship with Colin as much as he is sort of this like fantasy wish fulfillment. So there's almost this weird thing going on where Colin sort of represents the sweeping romantic gestures that are counterbalanced by Tom's like sleeping around. So I kept wondering, like, is this film saying that romantic gestures are the sleeping around for women? Question mark.
Girls don't want emotional availability. Girls want to be rescued on horseback.
By men they don't know. They've never seen before in their lives. But also that it serves as this sort of thing that I think at one time Tom in the film calls Hannah a love slut or an I love you slut. So there's almost this suggestion that like if his failing is sleeping around, her failing is that she is far too much into love and is unsexual, question mark.
That's really interesting. Going back to the lingerie scene, I really question whether Hannah has been ignorant of this attraction the whole time, and whether she was trying to provoke that. So that's actually a good point, to the fact that maybe she's trying to kind of reverse the sterility that he's imposed on her and trying to break out of the women as emotional, men as sexual kind of box that Thomas put her in the movies put her in.
Right. I really wish that there was a Bizarro World version of this film where they had pursued that. Like, for example, the scene with the sex toy chest at Hannah's wedding shower was one of my favorite scenes.
I feel sorry for the poor visual effects artist that had to CGI glow-in-the-dark effects to the thunder beads in every single scene that they appeared in afterwards. Like, some poor artist had to hand color that.
Chelsea, real talk, every time I saw Grandma with the anal bead necklace, I kept thinking, that's a badass accessory. Like, no lie. She looked amazing.
Yeah. I also love how they totally sterilized it as thunder beads rather than, like, that goes up an orifice.
Right, and it was such a funny scene, the way Tom reacted to it, too, because this was something that the sort of conniving other bridesmaid played by Busy Phillips played on him, is that she told him that this woman who was going to show up was going to read their tarot cards or what have you, and she showed up with a bunch of sex toys, from which he was very embarrassed and Hannah was humiliated. But you sort of wonder, like, why, if Tom is the sort of representative for sexuality out of control, why he's not invested in these sex toys. And of course, I guess that's because they also threaten his masculinity. Phalluses everywhere.
But also at this point, he has fully embraced his role as maid of honor and is trying to kind of morph, like, he's kind of accepted that he is subjugating himself to femininity. So I could see him trying to back away from this perception of him as a sexual being and like a traditional womanizer and like a man whore in order to kind of, in order to earn a role as a viable romantic partner for Hannah. So at this point, I think he is really trying to distance himself from sexuality. Also, I want to say that this movie does not deserve Busy Phillips. She's amazing and totally undervalued in this movie.
Well, I think actually this leads us really nicely to a big question, a big major sort of rom-com question that this film is asking, which is, can men and women ever really be friends?
This movie certainly says no. This movie says that if you play the long game, your female friend will eventually become a romantic object, and you've won her after 10 years of friendship. And I think that this also plays to a really negative stereotype of masculine relationships, is the idea that masculine friendships have to be so sterile and emotionally unavailable. And I think you see this a lot with Tom's friends, how they also really police each other's masculinity and push each other away in really kind of overt ways. So it's saying that male friendships are very sterile, and you can only find, if you find emotional intimacy with a female friend, then she will eventually become a love interest. And I think that this has become a problematic trend in society, and something that's perpetuated a lot through pop culture like this movie.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And with regards to that sort of sterile, unemotional male friendship piece, there was a really interesting scene where all of the guy friends and Tom are putting together what I presume are like bridesmaids gift boxes or what have you. And one of the guys gets so offended by the whole thing as a sort of threat to his masculinity that he's storming out, and he says one of my favorite lines I've ever heard, which was, quote, "I can feel my sperm dying inside of me. I'm going to a strip club to eat some meat.
And then I'm going to get into a fight."
It was just outrageous. So it's a moment of the film being aware of sort of how hyper-masculine and bizarre that is, but it's also leaning into the validity of that response in a way, too.
Yeah, it never challenges that character on his views. It never says that, whoa, this is toxic. This is really, really problematic. I think that it actually validates toxic masculinity in Tom's behavior, that he eventually wins Hannah in the end. So I don't think that this movie sometimes touches on and hints to the fact that its views on masculinity may be toxic and problematic, but it never challenges them or backs away from them.
Right, it leans into one of the classic toxic masculinity narratives in rom-coms, which I call the steal the bride and or go and get our girl theory, which is that it doesn't matter how a woman feels about you. If you show up at a major event in her life and tell her, like, you're the one and I love you, come be with me, she will be persuaded by that gesture alone.
Yeah, this goes to the dramatic moment, the big gestures, all that really matters, rather than the day-to-day and the showing up and putting in the work. I think that dramatic gestures they're a staple of rom-coms, but I also think that they're overrated, and I think that people rely on them. If they rely on them on real life, then they're undervaluing the day-to-day work that goes into romance and love and actual relationships. So I think that rom-coms kind of help perpetuate that because they're entertaining. But
I think it's ironic that the climactic moment of this film is the steal the bride trope, because in real life, what might have been better is for Tom to have just been a really great maid of honor to Hannah, right? And shown her in those small gestures of care and like intimacy that like, I care about you. I am the person who's going to care about you day to day to day, which is a direction that this film could have taken. But that doesn't, there's something about that just doesn't give us the same romantic satisfaction. It's not fun to watch.
Tom never learns his lesson. The thing that I really wanted from this movie was for him to have an inciting incident separate from Hannah leaving and going on her work trip. I wanted him to have an independent realization that he needed something from his relationships. He needed that friendship. He needed that partnership that he really gets from Hannah. But the second she's gone, that's when he realizes that something's missing from his relationships, and he gets it immediately. He never learns a lesson, and it kind of fits into the idea that their relationship is true love. Like, it's not something he could have built with any of his partners. It's something that he specifically had with Hannah, and it's unique because of her, rather than this is something that I could have pursued in any of my relationships.
That's true, but I found it interesting throughout that they never really addressed this question of Tom being sexually attracted to Hannah, because I kept thinking, well, if they've been friends for whatever it is, like 10 years, how is it that they've never once had sex? Doesn't that seem strange?
Yeah, in every scene, like, I have never danced with a platonic friend cheek to cheek. They were always holding hands, or at one point they kiss each other on the mouth. I'm like, y'all are definitely attracted to each other and not admitting it.
Yeah, I think if there's anything positive to be taken away from this film, it's that kind of lesson that, like, if you really love someone, say it. Just say it. Why run from it?
Yeah.
Don't wait for an Irish setter, a dog on the side of the road, to tell you to go get that girl.
First off, it was a border collie, and second, the only redeeming thing about Tom is that he's obsessed with dogs. Everything else about him, he is a trash fire, he is a heinous person. His love for dogs is the only thing that I found remotely attractive for him. Actually, that and his hair. But that's it.
I think there's a lot of truth to that, although I will say, if we stick with our theory that Hannah is like an absolute megalomaniacal like genius, and she's been playing this long con on him for 10 years, then they're both kind of like serial killers. Like, she's this like Hannibal Lecter type, and he's like Son of Sam talking to dogs, you know? So like there is a match made in heaven here. It's very dark, but it's true.
I have a hypothesis that at the very end, when he's riding the horse to the church and the horse launches him into the church doors, I think he died. I think that the last like 5 minutes of the movie, that's like the final seconds before his brain dies. So this is just an imagined happy ending before he goes into a coma.
Wow. So this is like a Jacob's Ladder, dark, gritty rom-com. I'm so here for it.
Like this take a lot better than they just got married at the end.
Yeah, that really works for me. So I think we can agree that this film is poison. Yes?
Oh, God.
So as we do on the show, what are our antidotes for this poison? What can we offer to people to rid them of all of the bad toxic masculinity and strange serial killer vibes of this film?
Well, I actually have two recommendations. The first deals with toxic masculinity, and the second deals with serial killers. So I would recommend Sex Education on Netflix. The second season just premiered a couple weeks ago, and it's one of my absolute favorite shows of the last couple of years, precisely because it engages with, subverts, and confronts toxic masculinity in a lot of ways. You see a lot of you see characters who are engaging in violent toxic masculinity, actively working to de-escalate their violent tendencies and try and have a healthier relationship with their sexuality and their masculinity. And you also see other characters confront father figures in particular to get their emotional needs met in a variety of ways. So I love Sex Education, and I think that it has a lot of really cool things to say about masculinity. My second recommendation, for anybody looking for a product with Grey's Anatomy alumni, don't watch this movie. Watch Killing Eve, because Sandra Oh is a goddess in human form, and it's, again, one of the best TV shows I've ever seen. So don't watch this from McDreamy. Watch Sandra Oh in Killing Eve instead.
My recommendation is the film My Best Friend's Wedding, which has a startlingly similar concept to this film. Stars Julia Roberts as a woman who is in love with her best friend. They've never discussed it, but then he becomes engaged to the beautiful young Cameron Diaz, and she becomes hell-bent on getting him back. What I love about this movie as an antidote for Maid of Honor is that it's a reversal in terms of gender, right? You have the woman who's pursuing the man who's embracing domesticity, and her ending is not the fairy tale ending. And I think that there's something really powerful about that, in the sense that that film is trying to say, hey, sometimes a friend is just a friend, and that's valuable and beautiful in its own way. And maybe you shouldn't get hung up on people who have never made the extra move to really have an intimate relationship with you, because if they haven't at this point, it's probably not there. There's something just really emotionally honest about that. And I also just love a good Julia Roberts movie. What can I say? Chelsea, thank you for watching this awful movie again.
I will never do it again.
Me neither, friend, but at least we did it together.
I remembered it so fondly, and I think that I was counting on Patrick Dempsey to carry through with his natural charm, and it just wasn't there.
No, not even with that hair. It still does not work. Thank you for listening to the RomCom Killjoys podcast. The show is produced by Liza Bertrand and me, Jonelle Walker. Our theme song is Lady Slut Hitchhike Love by the band A Giant Dog, and the song you're listening to now is a cover of one of my favorites, Baby Love by Colin Langanis. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at RomCom Killjoys. And don't forget, don't let anyone kill your joy. Not me, not a rom-com, not anyone. See you next time. Instead of breaking up, let's start some kissing and making